Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host and producer of Pause and Rewind, the podcast that chats to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And, let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now, but how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences, realisations, and relationships in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now, because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes, and a little of what makes our guests tick. So whether you're here for insights or inspo, or simply want to know about your heroes, this podcast is for you. You might never know someone's story, but if you pay attention, you'll hear it, you'll see it, and you'll feel it. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? We are live. Hey there, Octavian. Welcome to Pause and Rewind. It's absolutely brilliant to have you here.
Great. So nice to be here. So thank you so much for having me. That's amazing.
Well, absolute pleasure to see you. And I'm going to kick off with a question. And that is, what does the world look like for Octavian Starr right now?
This is a really good question. What does the world look like? I just left London, which I feel like is a big major moment for a lot of people who've lived in London for a long time. I lived in London for 15 years and my landlord sold the house and I just took an opportunity to move to the seaside, and it's the best thing ever. I live in Hastings now and it's incredible. Love living right next to the ocean. I literally watch the sunrise and the sunset over the coast every day, and it feels like a present. I also feel like I kind of live in a postcard. So that is great. I think I'm living alone for the first time in a very long time as well. So, and feels like a real opportunity to kind of do new things and develop new stuff.
Yeah, you let me know that when we spoke over email, you said you were really enjoying postal life. And I often ask when people have made that big move out of London, it's something that I've considered for a long time, is, I guess, are you missing it? And what exactly are you missing about it? Like, what have you discovered about yourself since making that big move?
I think, I'm actually finding that I've been in London more and engaging and going out more in London since I've lived in Hastings than I did when I lived in London, because I think living in London was so overwhelming. So as a disabled person, find that it was just so overwhelming, like having to do lots of traveling. It's loud, there's loads of overstimulation. I was diagnosed as autistic a few years ago, well, when I was 30. It was a long time ago actually. And I think I'm starting to realize what that means in terms of overstimulation. And I think when I moved here, I realized how overstimulated I was all the time living in London. And now it's like I wake up and my nervous system is regulated. I have a routine, calm. And so when I go to London, it doesn't feel overwhelming anymore. And so I can actually have a really nice time. I can spend a couple of days. I can see a bunch of friends. I can travel around on the tube. And it doesn't feel as intense because I know I'm going home to the quiet and the seaside, and that this is a short-lived thing. And so I think for me, it's all about I weighed up and I said, is London giving me what I need to balance out how much it costs to live here? And the answer was very quickly no. It just wasn't, and now it's well, I live in a place where the cost of living is lower and it balances out pretty much to the same. Traveling regularly into London is pretty much the same as I was traveling around London all the time and living there, and the cost of living in London. So yeah, it's wild. I love London. I love it. I love how big it is. I love how many different places there are. It's tons of little microcosm cities smushed into one. It's great. But for me, it's just not something I need all the time. What I really need is to be able to be calm and listen to seagulls. I'm a Pisces. I don't know how much I subscribe to astrology, but I love water, and being near bodies of water has always been calming to me. So I think that is what I've really noticed, is that sometimes you get the most out of a place when you leave it. That's what I'm experiencing.
I've had such similar responses from people that have moved that find themselves back there. I did try to leave London once, and I said I'm not going back for a while. I'm going to settle in here. And literally, I was away 1 week, and then I found myself back in London for a whole weekend. I think there's something that draws you back, but no, it definitely speaks to me about what is next. How has that shift impacted work?
I mean, I think for me, the training work for me has really dropped off because of all of the negative discourse around trans people. And so I've shifted more into mentoring and life coaching, which is something that I've been working on for quite a while. And, I was a support worker for about 12 years. And, that's very similar to coaching in a lot of ways. It's like helping people work through their life. And, I love training because it's giving people an opportunity to like have an educational experience that is tied to an authenticity, like somebody's lived experience, which I think is incredibly valuable. But, diversity and inclusion training has been online a lot especially since COVID. And so I found that like it hasn't really hurt that too much. And I'm traveling probably as much as I would have been before. And, I only moved an hour and a half away from London. So it's not that big of a deal if I if I need to travel in. But I find that a lot of access for diversity and inclusion training is still online because it is quite hard to get people all in the same room at the same time. People are working from home a lot more. A lot of people are living remotely, and commuting in. So even when corporations buy a piece of training, it's really hard to get everyone in the same room. So I haven't found that much impact. What I found though is the industry is very, very different than it was
So
a few years ago.
So different.
Yeah.
And how are you navigating that shift? Because we have seen a massive decline in it. DEI has been bashed left, right, and center. It's a topic that comes up on this podcast time and time again, and people are kind of navigating in different ways. For we create space. We've had to do our own level of kind of like shifting our focus. How have you found the shift, and how have you navigated it?
I think, yeah, for me, it's really navigating what is possible and what do people actually need, like focusing on what are the outcomes that people actually need right now, and can I provide that in a way that's equitable to me. I think it's something that's unfortunately happening again is a lot of people need this training and want this training and have no funding for it. So I think and I'm sure in a lot of other marginalized parts of DEI, like DEI as a whole, I mean, DEI is being demonized in the States. It's becoming something that is seen as negative, right? And so when you have companies that are US based or US funded, it's very difficult to get the training full stop, right? You have to find different ways to say DEI. You have to find different ways to explain diversity. Like in some places you can't even say the word diversity. You have to, talk about respect and intersectionality, and you have to pull it all back to profit in some. And I think for me, I struggle with that. I think there is a lot of people in this space that do that a lot better than I do. So I think I stepped back quite a lot, and I'm focusing on training that is more specific. So I do a lot of training for a charity called Gyres that I'm on the board for, and we do a lot of specific training. So I do a lot of, specific training for them, and it's things like very specific training around safeguarding that's LGBTQ inclusive that I wrote in partnership with some other charities, is CPD'd, and, people can get their yearly safeguarding for people or jobs who need that, and it's inclusive. So that's been really fun. We also do a being ready training around like working with trans people, preparing for moving on to passing on and after they've passed on, and what that looks like for death and dying professionals and in hospices and things. And these are very specific pieces of work that are catered to very specific people. And I think in those cases, it's easier because those things are catered to them and they need them. And there's been an absence of those things existing. And there's not very much of those things that are out there. So I'm kind of focusing more on that, and finding very specific learning outcomes and things that people can really get a lot out of. I think in terms of the kind of general DEI and more of the 101, there are a lot of people doing that and who have a lot more kind of business experience than I do. I love training in businesses. I love training everywhere. But I think it's like kind of that single access training with like specific outcomes and specific things, because I like to have a conversation. So I am not, when I train, I am not one of those trainers who likes to sit and go through a PowerPoint. Not that that's wrong, because that works really well for a lot of people. And some people want that. And that's the type of training they want. And I think that's amazing. And I think people have different dynamic ways of doing that. They have like mixed ways of doing that. I have an arts background and I have a community arts background. So for me, I like to do things that are a little bit different. So I like to kind of do a lot of group work. I like to get people a tiny bit uncomfortable, get people chatting. I like to do a lot of people like working through, active things together and finding solutions together. And that's just my style, right? I think I've trained a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And so all styles are super valid and really good. And I can do a lot of things, but my favorite is small groups of people doing very specific types of work. And for me, that makes the most impact and gives people like kind of the most hands-on learning. And again, that doesn't work for everyone, right? But I think especially being neurodivergent, I tend to get quite a lot of neurodivergent people coming to my training. So I think it's easier for them to engage with like a practical, like somebody's keeping them on track. Because I know if I'm just looking at, especially online, if I'm just looking at PowerPoints, it doesn't matter how interesting it is. I really struggle to engage because somebody isn't engaging me, you know? Like if questions aren't being asked, if things aren't like there for me to engage with, it's just difficult. And that's kind of where I'm at with the training. And then I'm focusing a lot more on my coaching and like well-being work at the moment.
And with, because a lot of the work that you're doing in this space and being in this generally is quite heavy. And for yourself doing so much around trans inclusion, tapping into your own lived experience and identity all the time alongside your, the knowledge that you've built up. How do you look after yourself through that? Because we already know that the landscape for trans folk is incredibly challenging at the moment. How are you looking after yourself through what's going on and then having to bring that into what you do daily as well?
I mean, this comes down to access and what people are able to engage with. I mean, I prioritized therapy for a really long time. So I have a therapist, see a therapist a couple times a month. For me, that is something that's really important. Therapy is not for everyone, and that is fine. But also, just keeping myself with some well-being rules. I think moving was really good for me. It's something I needed to do. And I think that was something, right? Realizing that and prioritizing that for myself was really important. And now that I've done that, I can really set a good routine for myself. As somebody with ADHD, routine for me is incredibly important. And if I don't have a good routine, I'm just completely thrown off. And it really makes it difficult for me to cope with everything. So, I think having a good routine, having a support network, whatever that is. So therapy, support groups, if you are somebody who goes to like specific like AA or NA or things that like, if you're in a recovery journey or, to really find that community and to not be afraid of finding community. Like everyone can go to a social group. I feel like I meet so many people when I'm mentoring and coaching where they're like, oh, I couldn't go to a support group. I'm like, well, why not? Like, well, it's kind of weird, isn't it? I'm like, well, why? Why is it weird to go and find people that you feel authentic with, that you can just chat to? And, there's no expectations to say anything. I think for me, saying no, like being comfortable saying no has been one of the biggest things for me. Saying no to social media. I was telling you earlier before we turned the recorder on, I have a pretty strict no news between, before 10 a.m. and after 10 p.m. as much as possible. I try not to engage with it because it's toxic. There is a lot going on. And, I want to stay present with it. I want to stay aware of it. I want to stay, as engaged with the world and what's going on as possible. But I also have to take care of myself because you cannot pour from an empty cup. If you've got nothing, there is nothing that exists to help yourself, to help anyone else. And then you're not doing the best things you could do for yourself in any respect, right? Because you just are pouring from nothing. And I think that's for me the biggest thing. It's just keeping on that, taking care of myself and saying no.
Yeah, and saying no is a skill and a muscle and an art form, I think, in terms of not just navigating your own feelings about saying no, but actually learning that you don't have to navigate other people's feelings and their reactions to you saying no. That's definitely something that I've really learned to kind of like, how you respond to my no is totally on you. It's at the point that I say no, as long as I'm not just fobbing you off and I've got a valid reason. You touched on there about kind of pouring from an empty cup. And actually, joy is a topic that comes up a lot on this podcast. Are you happy to tell listeners a little bit about Trans Secret Santa?
Yeah, so Trans Secret Santa came because there's a program that's been around a bit longer called Trans Santa on Instagram, and it's now housed with another charity in the US. And it works in kind of a similar way where they basically gather applications from trans youth all over the world now. They used to be just US and now it's global. And they kind of focus on young people that are in quite a lot of struggle, who need quite a lot of support and financial help. They get letters from them and they post it on their Instagram, and then you can like go to those letters and it goes to like an Amazon wish list which people then can fulfill. It's a very large scale project. And I realized, it would be really nice to do something like that in the UK. And I approached some folks that I knew, including Jude Guadamachi, who's the co-founder of that project. And we also founded it with somebody called Lizzie Jordan, who's no longer involved, but that was a different project. And, we got together and we built this really great version of it, which is much more kind of holistic, smaller scale, and just for young people in the UK. And it's the basis of it is really simple. Like, we raise a bunch of money, we buy a bunch of presents from as many local and small trans artists as possible. We get donations from some big companies. This last year we had Lush and Ben and Jerry's were two of our biggest supporters, and it was incredible, right, to have this support. We get a bunch of volunteers to come a couple days before we send everything out, and we pack all of these presents by hand. And this was the third year. So the second year we did it a little bit differently, but the third year was more like the first year. And that act, I think, for me, is that Trans Secret Santa is not just for the young people, but it's for the entire community and allies. It's for people to come and realize that this is a group of young people that really gets overlooked, but has an incredible amount of pressure, misinformed press, negative viewpoints. I mean, these young people are really living through a time that is incredibly difficult. And I just wanted to do something nice. Trans Secret Santa literally is just wholesome. It's just a time where people can get a nice card. We get a bunch of influencers and, trans kind of famousy folk and, people that are really influential in the community that the young people would know. And we get them to sign this card with nice messages for the young people. That card is just for them, and we send them that card. We got vouchers from Ben & Jerry's this year, which is incredible, so everybody could get an ice cream. And we got incredible amounts of presents from the common press. We bought from loads of small creators, and it was just incredible to have all of these different gifts and then get everybody together. And we had, what did we have? I think probably about 45 people over the course of the day at the A1 offices, which sponsored the event, to pack, and it was incredible. We just had such a nice day just packing these things. It's quite a lot, to pack 896 presents is a big thing.
Biggest year to date, right?
Biggest year to date. Yeah. I'm really hoping that we hit over 1,000 next year. Our hope is to hopefully, if we can work out sort of the shipping, to do Northern Ireland and the Channel Islands as well. Comes with extra things that we need to consider, but very open to, growing it and keeping it this beautiful community event. Really some of the feedback we had was just so wholesome. These kids just having just a nice day, and having, this was right after, the Girl Guides kind of said trans girls can't be part of Girl Guides anymore. And we had a couple very specific feedback responses that we posted in our Instagram that said, they just had this terrible news, and, this was just the best thing for them to see all of these wonderful messages and to just get this lovely present. There's nothing behind it. We don't have any agenda. It's literally just to do something really nice. And I feel like sometimes with everything that's going on, we forget to just do something nice for ourselves and for other people.
It was such a wholesome day. It was, I loved spending the day with you all, and everyone just had such a great time. And it's, it's a big operation as well on the day. It's, yes, it's a big operation, and you can see the level of effort that goes into it. But yeah, I think sometimes the simple things are sometimes overlooked, just in terms of putting a smile on someone's face, letting them know that we might not know you, but we're here for you and we support you.
Absolutely. And I think, seeing all the wonderful messages, we had even some messages from we had a message from Erin De Niro, Robert De Niro's daughter, in the card, which was incredible, just to get, all of those wonderful voices, and just so many people. I think for a lot of the young people, that card is one of the most important bits, is just knowing that there are people that have grown up and are doing okay. And I've done a lot of work with trans youth over the years, is kind of invited to just be an example to parents, basically, that trans people grow up, full stop.
Yeah. This is happiness and a full life and thriving is out there for you.
Yeah. Because I know that as a kid, I didn't necessarily see that. I really didn't think I would make it to 25, let alone I'm almost 46 in a few days. And I never thought that I would make that, ever, And so I know that there's so many kids probably in that experience as well. And I just want them to see examples of that, because especially, I just think we don't see a lot of examples of trans people thriving. We see a lot of experience of trans people having hardship and being, constantly having to explain themselves, and, these interviews where, people are asking them just terrible questions where they're having to justify their existence. We're not seeing enough examples of trans people just like growing up and being a bit boring and like having a dog and having a life and having hobbies, you know what I mean? So I think it's really important to do these little acts. It's so vital.
Well, Octavian, I love seeing it. I love seeing you steering so much of it, and I'm so grateful that our paths crossed and that you're here thriving as well. So thank you for agreeing to share your story. With that, are you ready to pause and rewind?
Yes, and I just wanted to say quickly too, with Trans Secret Santa, that is a project. It's part of the Trans Solidarity Alliance, which is doing incredible political lobbying work, which I'm also a bit of a part of. So please do check them out and all the things that they're doing right now on the ground, because it is so vital. Yeah.
They're doing incredible stuff. Okay, let's dive into it.
Yes.
Me back. Tell me all about little Octavian.
So I'm almost 46, which means I was born in 1980. And, that was an interesting time for various reasons, maybe neurodiversity, maybe trauma. I don't remember a whole lot. If you told me to pick a certain day or time, I wouldn't be able to do that. But I can tell you kind of an overarming kind of understanding I have is that I had a very vivid imagination. So, autism diagnoses for children in the 80s did not exist. So, I think looking back on my childhood, that was definitely the case, and I was definitely exhibiting a lot of those things. But my family just sort of let me get on with it, which I think actually was quite positive. Like, I think I have quite positive experience of just being allowed to be myself. I was very, very much introspective. I was a very creative child. I had a very vivid fantasy world that I think was a bit of an escape for me. I found other children difficult to understand. I felt, social interaction was difficult for me. I didn't really understand how people chatted to each other and what those it seemed like there was like a hidden language that I just didn't speak. And so I found making friends and things really difficult. So I kind of made my own, and I had these vivid fantasy worlds. I wrote a lot of like fantasy stories when I was like 9, 10, 11 about aliens that lived on other planets and made friends. And, I had an imaginary friend that was like a little miniature Sasquatch that hatched out of eggs, and, like crazy, I just was a very, very imaginative child. I think I really feel like I've lost some of that as I've gotten older, which has been really kind of hard. And that's something that I'm really trying to get back to right now. And I had to find like other ways to kind of engage with life. I think I was really, really bullied. I think kids didn't understand me at all. And I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 11, which is really rare for the time. But they put me on medication, which I promptly didn't really take. And I just learned ways to mask. I learned ways to do what people wanted me to do. But I found formal education really difficult. Like, I did it okay, but I found ways to kind of make it work for me, like studying in different rooms and things like that. I found classrooms really difficult. And I think one thing that got me through a lot was music. So I played saxophone from about, I think, 11 or 12 up until I was about 16. And I was in jazz band, and I played in marching band, which is not something you all have over here. And if, just look at marching band competitions. It's wild. You're welcome. So you don't really have it here, so I can't really explain it. But it's just, I think music was something I could get lost in, and it was something that I think really kind of allowed me to engage with people in a safe way. I think I was always good. I was talking to my mom last night, and she said, something you've always been good at is saying no. Like, if you didn't want to do something, you would just say no, and you just wouldn't do it. So, I mean, I think I had quite good boundaries with things that just didn't work for me. But I also wanted to please people. I wanted to have friends. And I think that was really difficult. I think it wasn't until I was probably about 16 or 17 that I realized I didn't need friends unless they needed me. And then I was able to start really developing good friendships, and I didn't know who I was, right? Like, I had an idea that I was very different. I think people told me I was a lesbian when I was about, I don't even know, 15 maybe. And I said, okay, sure. I didn't really attune to that. I did a lot of activism around being LGBT at a really young age, though. I started a well, I helped start an LGBT youth group in the small town where I lived in. So I grew up in a town called Grand Junction, Colorado, which a lot of people don't know about. It's a very weird place. It's got a lot of farms around it. It's a very close-minded type of place. So, I started a gay straight alliance with a couple of other kids from different schools. And my mom would drive me to these meetings that I started. So, I think I started activism quite young, but I didn't even realize that's what it was. I just needed a space and I could help make it. So I did. And that's kind of how my life has always been, is I'm like, well, there's something missing and I would like to have it. So how can I have it? Can I do it with somebody else? Can I, get part of somebody who wanted to start it? Like how do I get it? So I think, that moved me on to other types of stuff. And I think little me was just a very creative little bean that didn't really know where I fit. And that took me on some quite dark journeys. I'm not going to go into too much of it, but let's just say there's a couple reasons why I don't remember a lot of stuff. And, there was some really hard things that happened to me. And so I think growing up, dealing with those things and not really having a place to talk about it, not really having friends that were very trustworthy. I had one really close friend, but she lived in another city. And then she went through a lot of hardships in her later teens. And we don't have connection anymore. And it was really, really hard. I think there was a lot of stuff that was difficult, but I do remember myself now as just a really highly inquisitive, very creative little kid who just wanted to be kind, I think.
Yeah, and that and so much of that shines through now in terms of how you show up in the world. But taking it back to maybe what did sport look like at the time? You said your mum drove you to those meetings, and it sounded like was supportive of that. And did you feel support in terms of discovering your identity, but also just in terms of the darkness?
Yeah, I mean, so I come from a military family, and I don't know if a lot of people can resonate with this. I'm sure some people do, but my family was very lovely. Like, I think the general gist of my grandfather, who partially raised me, is just my mom, my grandparents. I don't have a dad really. So, I think he always would say, are you happy? Are you healthy? Great. He didn't need to really understand things. I think when I came out as a lesbian first, I guess, even though I didn't really ever completely resonate with that, I had no other option. I remember my mother was sitting on her waterbed. Waterbeds were a big thing. And, she was laying on her waterbed and she was reading Alive. I will never forget it. She was reading the book Alive, which is about a bunch of people who die on a mountain, have to eat each other. It's quite an intense book, right? So she's reading this book and I walk in and I'm really upset. I'm super nervous. And I tell her, I was like, oh, I think I'm a lesbian. And she just kind of put her book down. She's like, yeah, I knew that. And then just continued reading her book. And then I just lost it. I was really upset. She just consoled me and she's like, it's fine. Like, I knew that already. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, it's fine. And my grandparents always just went, well, yeah, okay, well, that's fine if that makes you happy. I don't know, my grandparents came from very religious, upbringings, and my grandmother was from the deep South, but I think they just kind of had this live and let live part of their existence where it wasn't their place to, judge other people. I'm really, really grateful for that. I know how special that is.
Even today, that's
Yeah,
still.
it's so special, and I think when I came out as trans, it was a little harder. I think, I told my mom, and I was 19, so 19, 20, so I was still quite young. And my mom, she struggled with it. I think she had a moment where she was like, I don't think I'll ever understand this or I'll ever completely respect it, which is not the case at all now. She's amazing. And it didn't take her very long to get there, to be honest. But I think, it was a normal reaction that I've seen a lot of parents go through. One of the biggest things is, she and my uncle told me that I was not allowed to tell my grandparents or I would be disowned. Now that kind of narrative had never happened in my family. That kind of, intense opposition or intense rule had never happened. I'd never had that kind of reaction from my family. So it felt very real and it felt like a very real threat. And I love my grandparents. They helped raise me. They're, an intrinsical part of my life and very, very special people to me. And so I agreed because I lived away. I lived away from everyone at this time. And it was fine for me to do that. I said, I guess, okay, and I agreed to it. And I ended up a couple years later, so I was on testosterone, but I didn't have a big beard yet. I shaved everything off. I wore a suit. That wasn't unlike me. I've looked pretty much the same all of my life, sans beard. Like I've never really changed that much. So I was always a very masculine presenting person anyway, and so it wasn't weird for me to wear a suit. So I wore a suit to my cousin's wedding, and we're up the coast in California and trapped, not near anything. My uncle decided before my mom and I got there that he was going to tell my grandparents. Why? Have no idea. Did he tell us before? No, he did not. So that was fun. And I remember being pulled into a room with my grandma and grandpa, and she's like, okay, so what's going on? And I said, well, this is what's been going on. I said, I realized that I'm trans. I'm doing this medical treatment. I kept it very much like to the medical guidelines because I think autism, exactly what the process was. And I spoke it all through with them. And I said, well, this is what's happening. And, I'm feeling really good. And I feel really good about this decision. And they told me not to tell you. And my grandmother never forgave them for that. Never. From that day, she was so mad at them for asking them to lie to her. And my grandpa just said, are you happy? Are you healthy? Is this why you've felt so much better? Like, it seems like you've been, on a much better path and you've been a lot healthier and a lot happier the last couple of years. And I said, yeah, that's exactly why. And he's like, great. Okay. And that was fine. Like, that was it. He was done with that conversation. And he said, it's very unfortunate that you were told to lie to us, but it's not your fault. And, my mom and my uncle never heard the end of that, I'm sure. Because my grandma didn't let things go. I realized then at that moment, you should never discount older people. Like, they were fantastic, and even, my aunt went and changed my name on my little plaque for the table. And, like, it was a very awkward day because my cousin is half Filipino. And so there was a bunch of people from the Philippines, and a lot of them did not speak English. And so they would just come up and be like, boy? And I was like, yeah, yes. And then, but they were very confused because they were obviously being told different things from different people. And I couldn't really discuss it with them because they didn't really speak English, a lot of them. So it was interesting because, they didn't seem to have a problem with it at all. And then the rest of my family, obviously a lot of this was very new for everyone, like on the day. I retrospect on that moment all the time because, it really showed me like who the most like loving and accepting people in my family at that moment were really my grandparents. They were like, well, you brought me this, you dropped this bomb on me on this day, and they just dealt with it. Like, were they perfect? No. Did they always get my pronouns right? No. But I kind of just said to them, like, look, if you mess up, but if it's just you and me or we're in the house alone, I don't mind, but I look like this. So if we go out in the world and you use the wrong name or the wrong pronouns, that's not going to make me look bad. That's going to make you look bad. And also it's dangerous because you live in Arizona, right? And that's not a very nice thing. And they were fine, like it was never really a problem. So yeah, it was interesting, that whole process.
Wow. Thinking about your own experience, what a story as well. And I wonder how much that has shaped your work with young people now in terms of how you support young people, and whether you think much has changed in terms of that experience versus what you're seeing now.
I'd really like to say it's changed. I think it has changed. Unfortunately, I think it's gotten worse.
Right.
I think really, yeah, it does form how I work with young people. I try to just talk to young people about the kind of authentic relationship they'd like to have with themselves and with other people and what that might look like. Right. And also being understanding that there are intersections in cultural things that I do not have experience of. Right. So I worked with a lot of people who came from backgrounds and cultures that were incredibly important to them. And there was a disconnection between that culture and their identity, and they still wanted to have a connection. Right. So my biggest thing is, how do you have those connections in the healthiest way possible? Are there other avenues? Are there LGBTQ friendly churches or synagogues or mosques or, places that you can go to be able to connect to those things that are really important to you? And in that, are you able then to have those conversations with your family and your loved ones and those people that maybe have been difficult, to have the right boundaries, have the right access, but also have a partnership. I think one thing that I realized is that all relationships that we have in our lives are a partnership. Partnerships have boundaries and respect. So how do we have those boundaries and respect in a way that feels authentic to us? And sometimes that does mean having a bit of a balance. I've met some people that are totally fine with their family not using the right pronouns and names, and they have found a balance with that. Right? For me, that would be very difficult. I would not want to do that. Personally, that would not work for me. But I am not everyone. Right? And so everyone's experience of that partnership with different people is going to be different. All relationships in their lives are going to be different. Some people might get passes that other people don't in certain ways, and that's okay. But it needs to be coming from that place where it is okay. Have you said yes? Why? Have you thought it through? Does it feel good? Is there, if it doesn't feel good, is it moving towards a place that is? And are you okay with that? And at what point do you make the decision that that relationship isn't going to be what you need it to be?
Yeah.
It depends. Everybody's journey is different. I've worked with young people that are very young. They mostly do, 18 to 25, that kind of age range seems to be where I mostly sit. But that's that's new adult. You're navigating so many different things. That's not just being trans. That's maybe leaving home for the first time, learning how to have an adult relationship with your parents, which is a whole thing.
Yeah.
I've had coaching. I do coaching with parents that are navigating that, navigating their kids leaving home and not talking to them as much and navigating those relationships. Right. So it's taught me a lot, what I've kind of gone through and all the people that I've met and all the experiences that I've seen and all the different jobs that I've done, down to I was a security guard at a music venue for a long time. I've done a lot of things. I loved that experience because I met so many different people and really, learned how to communicate my needs as a queer person, as a trans person to so many different people and realizing that that is absolutely possible, but also okay if you don't want to do it.
Yeah. For sure.
You know?
I think what you're talking about is so much of it. Yes, it certainly is part of the trans and queer experience more broadly, but also so many of these experiences exist beyond just our sexualities and our genders and such. They
Yeah.
span so much in terms of dreams, in terms of political views. These are commonalities, and they bring us together.
Yeah. And there are all different types of people. There are conservative trans people. There are, very conservative, very right-wing trans people. There are very conservative, right-wing LGBT plus people, right? There are lots of different types of people. Are those all going to be my people? Probably not. But, we can't be everybody's people. There's too many people, right?
You've touched on it a bit already in terms of early career. So I'd love to know. I'd love to know what the goal was. That typical question of what did you want to be when you grew up? Early career looked like for you.
Oh,
We're both 80s kids, right? Working in DEI was not a thing. So what was the goal?
Weirdly, I don't know exactly what age this was. I think it was quite young, but I was obsessed with Jane Goodall. So Jane Goodall, who just recently passed away, who worked with apes and primates. I wanted to be like Jane Goodall, wanted to be a primate psychologist for quite a while, I think. I think I wanted to be a professional musician. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be all of these things.
Hard relate to the variety of things that, it's probably an ADHD thing, but I wanted to be all of the different things.
Yeah, all of the different things. I wanted to be a DJ at one point. This is something that people who really know me are not shocked by, but a lot of people are, is that I was a huge raver. So in the early 90s, late 90s, I was really big into raves. I would go to raves all the time. I was really into techno music. I would go to big raves. The rave scene as it is now it's very different from what it was then. And it's really hard to explain to anyone who just isn't of the age to have experienced that. Sorry about that. But it was wild, right? It was wild, and I was wild. I was a wilding. And I think I did so many things because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I think when I moved to Portland, Oregon in 9, I really realized that I wanted to do more with people. So that kind of led me to I was a canvasser for a while. So those folks that walk around asking for donations, did that. But I kind of did more political campaigns. So I did like Rape Crisis when I lived in Denver, raising money for Rape Crisis Center. And then I did mostly stuff around the HRC and like political activism work, donations. From that, I kind of, really moved on into, I worked in the cinema for a while. I learned how to project movies, worked, doing work as a security guard. Then I worked as a bartender, worked at a restaurant, learned how to make coffee in Seattle. I did all kinds of things. I think through all of that, I was just really seeking how I could help, I wanted to help people. And that's kind of was always my main focus. But it was, having ADHD is wild. If you have it, you understand. If you don't, you really don't. And, everything, there's so many things going on all at once. My brain is like processing all the different possibilities and all the ways that they could go wrong and right all at the same time. And then sometimes it's so overwhelming that you don't do anything at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
The paralysis is real. I wonder if there's any of the ambitions that you shared. I want to be this, I want to be that. Are there any that you're still holding out for hope for that you think, I still want to do that? Because there are for me.
I really want to be an author. And I have wanted to write books for a really long time. I've got that expansive fantasy world in my mind. There's quite a few of them. And I have wanted to write fiction for a very, very long time. And it's like I have these stories, they're there, and I'll start something and I'll like write some stuff down, and then I have all these ambitions. And I think that's on my docket this year, is to just write a book. I may not put it anywhere. I just want to write it. I think I'm going to start with a short story and then see where I go. But I want to get this stuff out of my head. I want to really start learning how to write. I want to lean more into my art again. I was such an artistic kid. I really was so creative. I also bought a saxophone a few years ago, and I would like to get back into that again. But that's about finding a place to practice where I won't annoy people endlessly.
Do it during the day or on the beach. And do you think that is your way of, you said earlier that you felt that you'd lost some of that. And I think for so many of us LGBTQ plus folk, and I guess adults, sometimes more broadly, the world kind of snatches away some of that youthful innocence and that no fear. We have no fear about failure and such. Is that maybe trying to tap back into little Octavian a little bit and give yourself that freedom?
Absolutely. And I think also we're in an age now where the internet exists, right? And I am vastly so thankful that the internet didn't really come about till I was about 15. And I'm actually really thankful for that, because young people have so much access to so much all the time. It's just like absolutely overwhelming that it kind of takes away from, I think the internet can be really good, online communities and access, especially for queer folks. Being able to access other queer folks is incredible, right? And that was so transformative for me, even with early AOL and, dial up. It was still so important, right? So important. But, I think it can be too much, and we get away from, everything's digital. Little kids know how to use an iPad at like 3 years old. My friend's 8-year-old fixed my phone for me the other day. So there's some really, really good skills that are happening. But I think that we're disconnected from kind of physical creativity so much, we have so much input all the time. Social media, TV, YouTube, Snapchat. Don't get me started. Like Snapchat and I are not friends, but mostly for the risks to young people, but that's a different podcast. So, but I think it's, for me, there's so much you can engage with all the time that it's almost too much. And then there's not enough time to actually be creative, and to take away. It's like, what I like about writing is that I don't talk to anyone when I'm doing it. This is that's my time to myself, where my phone is turned off. I might have a light record on, I love my jazz. So I might put on some Charlie Parker and just read and then write and not engage. And I feel like I didn't do that for years. And I think it was really detrimental to me. And it's there's young people who have never actually, they read books online, they do audiobooks, which are good and very accessible for a lot of people. Love an audiobook. But there's so many kids that have never been to a library. They don't go to creative things. There's when you live in cities, I think it's quite hard for kids to regularly access creativity, for free in a safe way that's inclusive. It's not always easy. If you live in London, it might be, but when you get out of it, it might be hard. But also, London's so big, it's not always easy. There might be stuff, but if you're at an age where you can't travel by yourself, you're not going to be able to go to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's important that we start making time for creative outlets that exist in a non-digital world, but also give
Mm.
ourselves time to tap back into our younger selves. You know,
Wow.
when life was a lot simpler and without the fear. I wonder, what was the moment that you can pinpoint where you found yourself in inclusion?
Ooh.
Or was it a slow burner? You know, you said you found yourself in political causes and activism.
Yeah, very much a slow burn and in and out for sure. I think really once I moved here and I did a BA in community development and youth work, and so there was a lot of placements. There's a placement every year as part of that. And so I did a placement in gendered intelligence. I did a placement at Opening Doors, which no longer exists,
Such
which
a
was
shame.
this. I know it's such a shame. Opening Doors is so amazing. And, they were a service for older LGBT people. And I loved that experience because I also feel that intergenerational work does not happen enough in our community. Probably in any communities, but our community really doesn't happen enough. And I think it's really important to bring young people in. They did a lot of befriending, so you got young people going out and having coffee with older people, and I think that's so important.
Beautiful.
And we did a placement at Oxford House, which was a non-LGBT community space in Bethnal Green, which was amazing. And I think that's when I really started. I think maybe the second year of that degree is when I started meeting people. I started doing training. I started doing public speaking and like life experience type stuff, and then kind of lightly getting into things. And then I started meeting loads of other people who was in that space, and then it just sort of cannonballed from there.
Is there someone who has shaped you the most along the way?
I think a lot of people. I think I think about my grandparents a lot. I think they had a lot, and my mom. I think they all had quite a impact on me. They weren't always the easiest people, but never, no one ever is. But I think they always led with kindness, and I remember that. I think everybody leads with kindness. If they lead with kindness, things are so much easier to navigate. My grandpa was a tough guy in a lot of ways, but he also really wanted the best for me. Didn't know what that was all the time, but he trusted that I did. And I think that was a big thing for me. My mom as well has always been like that. She's like, well, I don't really understand that, but if that's what you think you need to do, then I will trust. And I will be here if it doesn't work out, right? And I think that was really important. I think some friends that I've had for a very long time, like those connections have been so transformative for me. And some of those people I didn't speak to for, 15 years. And then a lot of them have come back into my life more recently. And it's like nothing ever stopped, and realizing that those connections are so important, and that really shaped and formed me a lot. Realizing that like, you can grow with other people, and you can also have space from people for so long and still have that incredible connection that you had. But now it's even better and different, and you can be honest about things. I've not a perfect person. I've definitely done things that I wish I didn't, and, had situations in friendships and relationships that I made some pretty serious mistakes, and it's been nice to be able to rebuild some of those connections. And some of them I wasn't able to rebuild, and realizing that that's also okay. It's okay for those people to have those boundaries, and it's okay for those connections to no longer exist. And I think all of those experiences have been what has made me the person that I am, just wanting to lead from a place of kindness. And imperfect things go wrong, and it's okay if you have to own up to stuff, and you have to be called in, and you have to make changes, and you have to be retrospective. Like, that's all okay. And I've learned that from all of these people in my life.
There's accountability, right? There's
Yeah.
accountability and owning where relationships don't work out the way you planned, whether you're able to rekindle them or not. And then there's an acceptance that sometimes some things don't last forever, and that's making peace with that can be really
Yeah.
hard.
And, in our community, I don't want to get too low on it, but, we have to accept that a lot of people have lost people, because those people have chose to leave the world on their own. And in our community, that's more common than not. I have so many friends that are no longer here, and I have to remember them wholly. But also, working with some people, that's a really common experience in our community. And I think more so often a lot of communities, and the suicide rates in our community are very high. And it's something I want to mention because it's like, I have some friends that really shaped me as a person that I never forget and I remember all the time that just haven't been here for a decade, And I think it's really important to honor that too and to honor those spaces. I had a really amazing friend when I was 18, 19 years old who did not take my transition well. He really did not take it well. It was really hard for him. In retrospect, I think it was just very difficult for him. I think he was very much on the spectrum, but neither one of us knew what any of that was. When he died, I found out from my ex-partner, who was good friends with him, that he wanted to reach out to me, that he felt bad that he had ended our friendship because he chose to end our friendship. And it was hard to know that reconciliation could never happen, that I could never speak to that person again. And so I want to just mention those folks because he's been in my mind recently and a lot of other folks have. And, I just want to say it's important to also recognize those people as well. And to remember that, like, I try to honor the fact that he wanted that and that, I try to, remember him as part of that reconciliation for him and for me.
You now know that reconciliation was something that was wanted, even if that person didn't have the time to put it into action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking back so far, what are you most proud of to date?
I mean, Trans Secret Santa is amazing, and it's not my sole project. Of course, Jude is the co-founder, is amazing, and that project that we've done is incredible. What the Trans Solidarity Alliance being part of it this last year was amazing, and I think that project is just, I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of it. It's just so nice to do something that's just nice. And I think all the stuff that I've done around that, I'm in the back, backstage quite a lot. I do a lot of development with people. I talk to people a lot about their ideas, and I do a lot of mentoring and coaching with people about things they want to develop. And so I feel like being part of that, even in a small way, and knowing all this wonderful stuff that's happening and being developed is so great. I think that's a big thing that I feel so good about.
The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day rave, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Are you ready for some quickfire questions?
Yes, please.
What album, book, or movie has had a lasting impact on you?
My favorite film is a French film, and I'm not going to try to say the French title, but it's called City of Lost Children by Jean-Pierre Jeunet, and he also made the Amélie, which is a very famous
Beautiful
film. Yeah, but City of Lost Children, I believe, is his second film, so a couple films before Amélie, and it is absolutely beautiful, dark and gorgeous and ethereal, whimsical. It's just gorgeous, and it's about this kind of mad scientist who is stealing the dreams of children. It's not a horror film. It's very whimsical. Don't worry. It's not. It's the way he does his cinematography is amazing, and it's just the storytelling. He's able to tell stories in this way that is, you don't need words. The characters are so well developed. The way he films is just amazing. So it's an incredible transformative film for me. I think it's just that type of really intense creativity that's so layered, and you just get lost in it. That's my absolute favorite film.
What's a saying you live by and one that you'd put in the bin?
Ooh, I really don't like the saying, don't cry over spilled milk, which I do understand that, they're saying, oh, just let it be, you don't need to cry about something that's already happened. I kind of disagree, I feel that it's okay to be upset about something that's gone wrong. And I think it's absolutely okay to do that and to be upset, but also to realize that the moving on element of that saying is really important, is to say, yes, it's also important to move on, but you can be okay with feelings. I think that whole kind of that saying's really old and it comes from that time where it's fine, just buck up, move on. Which I think is not great. So I think it's not very healthy to push yourself to not have any connection or feelings to something. Like, you can still say, all right, I'm going to give myself a minute and then I'm going to move on because I don't want to put too much energy into it. Sure, fine. But like, not allowing any of that, I don't think is super healthy, at least not for me. I think, we can do the best that we can do is where I'm at. I say that a lot to a lot of people that I work with. I'm like, well, we can do the best that we can do. Is that the best that you could do for yourself today? Great. Was the best that you could do for yourself get up? Wonderful. Then that's the best you could do today. And that's okay.
Yes. And that feels especially poignant right now in
Yep.
the current atmosphere in the world.
Yeah.
What's been the best adventure of your life so far?
I think moving here was really big, but I think, the best adventure has just been being authentic. I think being able to become the most authentic version of myself has been the best adventure. I had to learn a lot about myself. I had to, really explore things on a level that I think not everyone does, or needs to, really. I preface this with, everybody's experience is different, and this is just mine. But I think for me, I don't call transitioning a transition. I don't really say when I transitioned. I said when I became the most authentic version of myself, because I feel that I have always been this person. I have always been this person. I'm not much different than I've always been. I just am now a more comfortable and authentic version of myself. But I've always been this person. My mom said that to me last night. She said, well, you've always been this person. The shell matches, the inside, but you've always been exactly the same. And I think this is the thing for me, is that transitioning and becoming authentic allowed me to engage authentically with the rest of my life. And I think without doing that, I'm almost positive I wouldn't still be here, not to be too sad, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And, I don't like to go on that too much, but it was hard, like before I kind of knew that was an option for me, it did not seem like there was many opportunities for me to continue on. And I didn't meet another trans person until I was 19. No internet, not a lot of understanding. I didn't have a cell phone until I was 25. I didn't have access to a lot of stuff. I didn't really engage with social media that much before I was 25. I didn't meet a trans man until I was 19. And at that moment, everything clicked. So I think for me, that authenticity and being able to become myself, even though that journey wasn't the easiest, it was the most transformative and most special thing to be able to do that, and to be able to do that at that age. I wish I could have done it younger, and I'm almost positive I would have if I have had a narrative. Whether that would have been possible at that time, who knows? But it's, for me, that's been the greatest gift and the greatest journey for me.
What 3 words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
Ooh, complicated, kooky, and exploration. The list of words I wrote earlier is not the ones I just used, but that's ADHD. So I think kooky is definitely something, like, I'm a huge Addams Family fan. So, the whole like spooky kooky thing is my jam. I'm an old goth, but in that kind of whimsical goth way. And so I think kooky for me means like, kind of spooky, but in a fun way. Like the dancing skeletons kooky, that type of thing. I just really embody that kind of explorative part of just constantly trying to be a more engaged version of myself, and that's complicated. So that all kind of makes sense to me.
Absolutely. Let's fast forward a little bit. What exciting things do you have coming up?
Well, Trans Secret Sets is going to happen again, isn't it? So that's going to be...
The way this year is flying by, it's going to be on us before we know it.
I know. So I'm already starting to think about it and pre-planning coming soon. And I just, really love that project. And I'm really excited about building some group coaching opportunities. So keep an eye out on that. Developing something for parents of trans kids, to just have like some group coaching and some space for them, which I think is something that is really needed right now. Because, I love working with young people, but I also am very aware I know a lot of parents, and parents need a good space too. I think that's really important. I'm developing some training with a few people and some other fun little artistic projects to use my master's degree in community art. I am developing some artistic well-being sessions with an artist friend of mine. So everything, this is development time right now for me.
Big move, development time, creativity, short story, saxophone, lots swirling around.
Yes.
And of course, it's always, where do you start first?
I've been trying to just give space for lots of different things every day, so my ADHD doesn't get bored. And, I'm like, okay, well, this is the time I'm doing admin, and then I'm going to take some time to do some creative stuff, and then I'm going to go walk the dog, and then I'm going to spin in a circle, then I'm going to stare at a wall. That kind of stuff. Maybe literally, maybe figuratively. Who knows?
Do both.
I really love my dog. My dog is great.
What's your dog's name? How old is your dog? What breed is your dog?
My dog's name is Reggie, and he is 12 and a half, and he's a Chihuahua, and very much isn't a stereotypical Chihuahua at all. He's very quiet. He's more like a cat. Well-trained Chihuahuas generally, unless they have some other bits and pieces, Chihuahuas are very tricky dogs to train. They're very tricky dogs to have. They're great dogs, but they are a tricky breed. He sleeps. He's sleeping right now. He sleeps most of the day. That's kind of his thing. He's really excited when he's not sleeping, but he also loves sleeping. So that's mostly what my dog does. He sleeps in various different places of the house, and then he likes to sit in sunbeams like a cat, and he's just great. He's a joy. He's so lovely and sweet, and you can take him anywhere, and everybody just loves him, and he's just a great little companion.
Yeah, Reggie.
Yeah. He's a good guy.
Do you have any practical takeaways for anyone out there wanting to carve out a career in inclusion or create an inclusive space or project?
Really, the big key is to be really clear on what you want to get across. Like, do you have specific niches that you want to work in? What's important to you? What are the key messages that you want to bring to people? And then when you're thinking about speaking to people about inclusion, you have a very clear vision about what that means to you, right? Like, what is inclusion? Is inclusion coming from your personal experience? What is that personal experience? And then tying it to legal things, the basic bits of inclusion. Have you read things around DEI? Do you understand what the whole landscape looks like? You don't need to be covering everything. If you're in a niche, you're in a niche, but you need to understand how everything works together intersectionally, because not one thing in inclusion work is one thing. All things are tied to all things. Everybody is an intersectional person, so you need to think about all the intersections around you. Do you have an inclusive practice? Do you understand what an inclusive practice means? Have you looked at your own practice first before you're talking to people about it? Do you really understand it for yourself? Because if you have a very clear understanding about your commitment and your understanding of inclusion, then you really be able to not only sell that to other people, but be able to really communicate that in a way that feels authentic to you. And I think that's the best way to really carve out a good place in inclusion. I think, me realizing that, like, I like to stick in certain lanes. I like to develop certain types of things from my other experiences, and that's where I'm finding the most joy. That's part of that experience for me, right? And I would really say, if you are looking to get into this, ask yourself why. Have you talked to other people in the industry? Is there anybody you want to collaborate with? Is there anybody you want to learn from? I have done so many trainings with so many people. I've gone to other people's trainings. I've watched other people's seminars. I've learned from other people in this space. And I think that's really important. You're not taking from them. You're learning from them, right? Do not take things from people. Be very, conscious that you are using your own material and you're writing your own stuff. Collaborate with people. Pay people to collaborate with you. If you need something reviewed by somebody because you need a more intersectional lens that isn't your experience, pay them to do that. Don't expect people to use their marginalized experience to help you for free. I think that would be a good thing, is that, if I have something I want reviewed, I'm either in a partnership with that person or I'm paying them for their time, right? So that's it. There's been some projects I haven't done because it didn't have a budget. And sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to put stuff on hold until you have the right infrastructure to do it.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing of, like, don't use tokenism, right? Don't try not to use people for your stuff just because they should be teaching. Trans people come up against this a lot. So do a lot of other people, any marginalized person, that, like, well, you should be telling people, like, it's your job to teach us. It isn't.
Yeah.
It isn't. Our opportunity to engage with you and your opportunity to engage with us, but that needs to be an equitable relationship, right? Yeah.
I know there'll be so many people in this space listening to this that would be nodding away and kind of like hard relate. And then there are so many organizations where I'm like, shots fired because they're so guilty of doing all the things you've just said don't do.
Yeah, but also people want to do the best, right? And some people just don't have the budget and they don't, there are some times where I've done a bit of like, well, what can you do? Can you open other doors? Can you, what is available to you? Like, okay, if it's a charity or if it's a school or if it's a place with a very low budget, yeah, there's things you can do, but it's that equity. I'm not saying equity is always cash, but if it's a big corporation, probably should be cash. And I'm just saying, like, if you don't have the budget, what are other ways you could get it? Right? Can you fundraise? Can you talk to someone else? Can you make the training inclusive of another subject, right? And bring somebody in and do like a dual subject and maybe you can get funding that way. There are ways to make these things happen. Do not assume that these people should be doing this for free.
My final question for you, Octavian, is this. Do you have any words of encouragement or wisdom for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
Yes. I think really just change can happen anytime, right? And if you've been on one path and it doesn't feel good anymore, it's totally okay to scrap it. Scrap it. Throw it in the bin. Throw it partially in the bin. Learn from it. I think the reason I am where I am now is because I've done all the things that I've done. I don't think I'd want to take away any of those experiences, even the ones that were really challenging, because those have all brought me to where I am now and given me the kind of knowledge to do the things in the way that I do them now, very specifically. Maybe there's a couple things I would have redone, but that's okay. I think it's really important to just realize that like we can change at any time. We don't have to be a set thing. And if it's not working anymore, it's okay to change it. You might need to go through a process to get there to be able to do it, but it's okay to just be vulnerable, let go and say, it's all right if that didn't work. That doesn't necessarily mean that anything is wrong. Maybe that means it's right. Sometimes that intense need for change is actually bodies, our minds, our spirits, whatever it is you want to say, telling us it's time to let that go. It's time to learn from it and it's time to move on, right? And that there are other experiences that are available for you if you just let go. Let go of that and see what happens, right? There's been many times that I've done that where I was, quite not financially great for a long time, but I still felt the best that I ever had because I had let go of something and I was creating something that felt more authentic for me, and I was taking care of myself. And that meant challenges in other ways, but it still felt like the right thing to do. It was incredibly hard to do. It took me a lot longer than it should have. And, that's, I think the biggest takeaway is to trust yourself and to lean in to that uncomfortability, because when we're uncomfortable and vulnerable about something, it's usually because we really need to do it, but it's feeling super scary and our brains are like, oh my gosh, that's really scary, don't do it. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't, or at least look into it, right?
I'm taking so much from that, particularly the letting go stuff and the discomfort around that. Octavian, I have loved spending this time with you. Thank you for being such a wonderful guest. Thank you for all the incredible work you do. I'm so grateful that we get to collaborate. And I can't wait to keep an eye out for what you've got coming up next.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love all the work that you do as well. And I can't wait to do more things. So thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
And before you sign out, how can people support and get involved with Trans Secret Santa?
Look on the Trans Solidarity Alliance website, Trans Secret Santa website, which is just a little one-pager at the moment. And our Instagram, the Trans Secret Santa Instagram is the best place. There won't be a lot going on right now, but do keep an eye on it, follow it. Keep an eye on the Trans Solidarity Alliance socials as well.
Fantastic. Octavian, thank you so much. See you soon.
Thank you so much.